A child was born on the wild steppe with no shoes to wear and no clan to rely on. Betrayed and abandoned, he survived on fish blood and wild roots. Yet this very boy would go on to become the leader of an army that made the whole world tremble. This is the story of Genghis Khan and the rise of the Mongol Empire, from the arid grasslands to the days when they conquered nearly the entire Eurasian continent, connecting the civilizations of China, Persia, the Middle East, and Europe in an unprecedented way. The Eurasian steppe was the largest continuous grassland ecosystem ever to exist, covering nearly 1/5 of the Earth's land surface. It stretched from Hungary and Poland in Eastern Europe across over 8,000 kilometers of hills, salt lakes, and rivers, until it reached northern China and the Manchurian forest by the Pacific Ocean. In this region, the dry and cold climate lacked the rainfall to support dense forests or large trees. The land was barren and the vegetation sparse. Only hardy, low-growing grasses could thrive on the vast, flat plains. But this was precisely the ideal environment for large herbivores, such as antelope, bison, and mammoths, to live and roam in massive herds. Around 40,000 years ago, the first humans appeared on these endless grasslands. They lived off nature's generosity, hunting wild game, gathering fruits, and wandering through the boundless seas of grass. Among all the animals that shaped the lives of the steppe peoples, none was more important than the horse. Originally native to North America, horses migrated to Eurasia via the land bridge that once connected the continents. Before long, these creatures became inseparable from the lives of humans here. Initially raised for meat like other livestock, by around 5,000 years ago, evidence of horseback riding began to emerge. The domestication of horses transformed life on the steppe. Before the horse, nomads could only move their herd a few dozen kilometers each day. But with horses, that distance multiplied several times over. In addition, the invention of the wheel allowed them to carry the elderly, children, and belongings without disrupting their mobile lifestyle. Portable tents that could be assembled or dismantled at any time became icons of nomadic life. About 4,000 years ago, a group of Proto-Indo-Europeans left the western steppes, taking horses and chariots with them. They spread across the continent, leaving traces that still echo in language today. Words like equester in Latin, hippos in Greek, or mari in English all descend from the same linguistic roots. Even the word ma in Chinese and mo in Mongolian carry echoes of this ancient past. The Greeks called them Scythians, fierce horsemen without walled cities, living from their chariots and horses, feared by sedentary societies. Even though they were technologically less advanced, they remained a force no empire could easily subdue. By the end of the 4th century, when the Roman Empire was cracking under internal power struggles, horsemen from the north suddenly surged down. These were the Huns, a wild and untamed race as described by scholars of the time. These people didn't farm or build homes, and when asked about their homeland, their children would shake their heads, for they had been conceived in one place, born in another, and raised elsewhere. In the east, China too suffered constant raids from northern nomads. During the Han Dynasty, the Xiongnu tribe repeatedly harassed the borders. Some scholars even suggest the Huns that later threatened Rome were descendants or distant relatives of these ancient Xiongnu. Han Dynasty historian Sima Qin described the Xiongnu as a barbarian people of the mountains, constantly migrating in search of water and pasture. They had no cities, no fixed settlements, and no written language. Children learned to ride sheep and shoot birds with bows from a young age, so that by adulthood, every man became a fearsome mounted warrior. Around the 4th century, steppe peoples invented the stirrup, which helped riders stabilize themselves in battle. A Chinese medieval writer recorded the terrifying sight of these warriors charging at full speed, their bodies standing upright in the stirrups, moving as fast as a storm, striking left and right like wings cleaving the sky. Their bows could pierce iron armor. For civilizations bordering the steppe, from China to India, Persia to Eastern Europe, nomadic tribes were a strange, terrifying, and unpredictable menace. Sometimes these tribes splintered or were subdued through violence or diplomacy. but every few centuries they would reunite, sweep down, and shatter the old order. By the end of the 12th century, human history witnessed the dramatic rise of the Mongol people from the eastern steppes. Initially, they were just one of many scattered groups, speaking ancient dialects and worshipping a host of different deities. Despite their diversity, they all shared a life rhythm dictated by nature. In the rainy season, the grasslands turned lush and herds roamed freely. In the dry, cold winters, they migrated north, towards sheltered mountain valleys. The Mongols' typical dwelling was the ger, a round tent made from flexible wooden frames covered in felted sheep wool. These, kept in heat, could be assembled and disassembled with ease and were transported on large wagons. At night, traveling caravans formed circles with their wagons to protect against bandits and wild animals. The tents always faced south to welcome the sun. Inside, seating positions reflected hierarchy. At the center was a hearth fueled by smokeless, sweet-scented goat dung. Meat, milk, butter, and other livestock products sustained them in the harsh environment. Items the steppe lacked, like silk, silver, or furnishings, they traded with the south in exchange for fur, livestock, and hunting birds. Horses were their most prized asset, the foundation of both economy and military power. Southern steppe tribes like the Khitans or Tatars held power over vast territories. In contrast, the Mongols were weaker, forced to survive on the harsh, forested northern steppes bordering Siberia. Grazing was scarce and herding large flocks impossible, so they supplemented their diet by hunting deer, small animals, gathering pine nuts, and fishing. The medieval Persian historian Ata Malik Juvayni described their miserable state. They had no unified leader. Each clan lived separately, in constant conflict. They wore clothes made of dog or rodent pelts, ate carrion, and drank fermented mare's milk. Signs of leadership were rare. The symbol of a supreme chieftain was a pair of iron stirrups. Life for the Mongols was grueling and unforgiving. Unlike many neighboring tribes that had already formed alliances and absorbed foreign cultural influences, the Mongols clung to their native beliefs, worshipping the Earth Mother and the sky god Tengri. Their myths spoke of a divine origin by the union of a blue wolf and a red deer. Generations later, a woman named Elan gave birth to 5 sons. When strife arose between them, she gave each a single arrow, which they easily broke. But when bound together, none could snap them. This became the guiding principle of steppe survival, unity above all. No one embodied this better than Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan. Born into the lowest ranks of society, he would change the fate of the world. Temujin's story began with his mother, Hoalun, of the Alkanut tribe. In the late 12th century, she married Yesugei, a warrior from the Borjigin clan. Together they returned to his camp, but on their way they crossed the lands of Desolation, a fading Mongol leader. Enamored by Hoalun, he abducted her, forcing her to become his wife. Soon, she bore him a son named Temujin. Legend says that when Temujin was born, he clutched a blood clot in his fist, a warrior's omen. From a young age, he showed remarkable talent, mastering horseback riding, archery, and fishing. But relations within the family were fraught. His half-brother Begter despised him, often taunting him as an outsider. At age 9, Temujin was taken by his father to find a wife and forge family alliances. But on their return journey, Yasugi was poisoned and died. With their leader gone, the clan fell apart. Hoalun and her children were abandoned in the freezing steppe, left to perish. But through sheer will and unity, they survived on wild plants, small fish, and whatever they could find. Even so, tensions simmered. Begder hoarded the best food and sought to marry their mother to seize control. Eventually, Temujin and his brother Kasar killed Begder, igniting the first blood feud in Temujin's rise to power. When summer came, a rival tribe, the Tachiud, was stunned to find the family still alive. Fearing future revenge, they accused Temujin of murder and hunted him down. He fled to the dark, rugged Burin Khaldan Mountains, hiding in forests and rocks. But ultimately, Temujin was captured and made a slave. Even in chains, he never broke. His burning desire was to return to the betrothed bride promised to him years before. At a summer feast of the Tachiud, he knocked out a guard and fled, diving into the icy Onan River. The cold water carried him far until he was rescued by the loyal Muge clan. At 16, he returned, gathered allies, and reclaimed his promised bride, Borte. They married and settled by the Onon River, hoping for peace. But destiny had other plans. When Temujin went hunting, the Merkit tribe suddenly raided his camp, looting their belongings and abducting Borte, his wife. Too weak to retrieve her alone, his only hope was to seek help from Jamuka, a childhood friend who had since become a prominent warlord among the Kattegat tribe. With Jamuka's support, Temujin managed to rescue his wife. But by then, Borte was already pregnant. No one knew for certain who the child's father was, yet Temujin accepted the boy as his own, naming him Jochi, meaning guest or visitor, and raised him as his firstborn son. After enduring hardship and misfortune, Temujin realized a harsh truth. Survival on the steppe required more than personal strength. It demanded solidarity. As a result, he and his family moved to Jamuka's camp and lived as kin, fighting side by side. However, as time passed, the bond of brotherhood between them began to fade. One day, Jamuka assigned Temujin to stay behind and watch over the livestock, a clear sign of condescension. Following his wife's advice, Temujin quietly left the camp. To his surprise, nearly half of Jamuka's warriors chose to follow him, drawn by the fairness and justice Temujin practiced on the steppe. Traditionally, the old nobility divided spoils of war at their whim, leaving commoners with nothing. But Temujin, having grown up by the icy Onon River, understood the value of sharing. He introduced a bold new rule: spoils would be divided according to merit. Moreover, he established a humane policy for the families of fallen warriors, ensuring widows and orphans received a share. He also allocated provisions for the elderly, the wounded, and the disabled. Thanks to these principles, when Temujin left Jamuka's camp, he was not short of loyal followers. But taking half of another's army meant turning a former friend into a future enemy. At that time, the Mongols were still divided, with no one leader powerful enough to command them all. Now two warriors stood against each other, both harboring the same ambition: to become the Khagan, the supreme ruler of the Mongols. In the summer of 1189, Temujin struck first, convening a great Kurultai, a political assembly mixed with festive games and competitions. There, he declared his ambition to unite all Mongols under his leadership. When Jamuka heard of this, he was furious. Tensions escalated between their camps. The final spark came when a relative of Jamuka was killed in a robbery, providing the pretext he needed to wage war against Temujin. Both sides mustered their forces, eventually clashing at the Battle of Dalan Baljut. The earth thundered with the sound of hooves and arrows flew like a storm. Though Temujin's troops fought fiercely, they were defeated and forced to retreat into the mountain valley. Jamuka's revenge was brutal. He executed 70 of Temujin's allied chieftains, beheading their leaders and tying their heads to the tails of horses. Temujin was left broken, homeless, and disappeared for nearly a decade. Some historians believe he fled south into China, awaiting the chance to return. Since ancient times, the settlers of the Yellow River Plain had often clashed with mounted raiders from the northern steppe. Long defensive walls stretching thousands of kilometers, later known as the Great Wall, had been raised to hold them back. Yet Chinese history constantly cycled between unity and division. By the early 11th century, the Han-led Song dynasty re-established central power in much of its old territory. However, by the 1120s, a powerful force rose in the northeast, the Jurchens from Manchuria. The Jurchens surged down like a flood, conquering the north and establishing the Jin dynasty. Though they had once been dismissed as savages, the Jurchens swiftly assimilated Chinese customs, language, and courtly manners. Yet to the Song, they remained foreign usurpers. The country remained divided for 2 centuries, the Jin ruling the north, the southern Song holding the south, each side constantly vying for supremacy without decisive victory. The Jin dynasty, having risen from the northern forests themselves, understood the threat posed by rising powers on the steppe. They implemented a ruthless yet effective strategy, using nomads to control other nomads. Frontier tribes were hired as border guards called jiaki. Whenever one tribe grew too strong, the court would favor another tribe to keep the balance. This prevented any one force from uniting the steppe. By the winter of 1196, fearing the growing power of the Tartars, the Jin court summoned Temujin and his powerful ally, the Karat leader Togrul Khan, to strike the enemy. After a decisive victory, they were astonished by the treasures they seized. The Tatar tents and wagons overflowing with riches, even their children adorned with gold nose rings and sable-lined garments. The Jin court was pleased and appointed Temujin as a commander. This campaign brought Temujin new wealth and followers. His friendship with Togrul Khan deepened, and his reputation spread further. However, while Temujin's forces campaigned in distant lands, the Dorban tribe launched a surprise raid on his home camp. Temujin retaliated without mercy, destroying their leadership and crushing any thought of rebellion. He offered the defeated tribes a choice: join him as equals or die. To prove his sincerity, Temujin had his mother adopt a young Dorban orphan. Distrustful at first, many families ultimately chose to join him. This policy was unprecedented on the steppe and threatened the old aristocracy. Many nobles either fled to Jamuka or resisted. In 1201, the rivalry between Temujin and Jamuka erupted again in a fateful civil war that shook the entire steppe. There were no castles or flags, only waves of mounted archers armed with curved swords and composite bows. The Mongols believed deeply in shamanic magic, and on the eve of battle, Temujin's shamans summoned dark clouds, unleashing thunderstorms upon the battlefield. As battle raged, Jamuka's shaman tried to counter the storm, but the wind turned against him, scattering his own camp. His troops panicked and fled. Jamuka was forced into the same desperate retreat Temujin once endured years earlier. Though he rallied his remnants, his strength had waned. In the end, Jamuka was captured and executed. The great power struggle for the title of Khagan was over. One ruler now commanded all the Mongols. The remaining tribes pledged allegiance. The old aristocrats who resisted were executed, their power wiped out. The survivors were absorbed into Temujin's army, becoming the lifeblood of a new empire. Even old allies turned against him. Togrul Khan, his former mentor, plotted betrayal, but the scheme failed. Finally, in 1206, a grand Kurultai was held under the open sky. Leaders and warriors from across the steppe gathered, and Temujin was formally proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler of the Mongols. From there, a colossal empire was born, forged from grass, wind, and blood. But this was only the beginning. The Mongol Empire would not stop at the steppe. It would descend upon China, sweep through Persia, and send the thunder of hoofbeats across Europe. Within a century, fur-clad horsemen would redraw the map of the world with steel and war.